Okay, tonight I wanted to speak about the difficult issue of the soil azazel, the, uh, the goat which we throw down the cliff to disintegrate into bits and pieces as it rolls down the cliff in Midbar Yehuda in the desert outside, distance from Yerushalayim. And what is the point of this, and how do we understand it? And there's a famous Ramban on soil azazel, and it says, among other things, that our intent with the soil azazel is not the carbon, obviously, but our intent is to do the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who commanded us to do this. And he gives a mashal. It's a mashal to somebody who makes a su'udah for the king. And the king commands the host to give one portion to a certain one of his slaves. And the person who gives, the host who gives that slave that portion, he's not doing it for his honor, to honor the slave directly. He's doing it because the king asked him to do it. Nothing to do with the slave directly. So everything is for the king. It's as if the king is giving that portion to the slave, and this way he keeps the mitzvah of the king, and everything is fine and dandy. So then he goes on to describe how he doesn't want why they're gorillas, in order that it shouldn't seem that we are designating the soil azazel, but rather the soil azazel is, so to speak, designated on its own by Kodesh Baruch Hu, I should say, and we don't send it for our own purpose, we don't shecht it, which would be for our own purposes, and he says, from this you can understand why the person who sends the soil azazel and the person who burns the paraduma, both of which are avodos outside the Beis Hamikdash, have to wash their clothing. Makes them tamei, the fact that they're involved in this avodah. Before that, the Ramban said that this korban, so to speak, the soil azazel, which he says is not a korban, is brought to appease the Satan, right? The people would be ovdei Elohim acherim. This is not what we do here. We're not allowed to do that. But we send the Sor, the Bamidbar, to the Sor, the official, Moshe Mukamas al-Korban, who controls the places of desolation. And evidently, the Ramban is equating, and others equate, and I don't understand exactly how this works. But there seems to be an equation made between the Satan and the Sashal Esav. And of course, the Esav was Ish Sa'ir, and there's a connection between the Sa'ir and Esav. But the Sashal Esav and the Satan seem to be somewhat interchangeable in this discussion of the Soil Azazel. I don't think in Chazal we find they're the same entity, but maybe they both function similarly when it comes to Yom Kippur. So whether it's the Satan or the Sashal Esav, the intent is the same. And Chazal say in Mesachas Yuma that the reason we have the Soil Azazel is to atone for the Chet of Azah and Azoel. Azah and Azoel, which according to many sources are the fallen Malachim, or called the Bnei Elohim, at the end of Parshas Breishis, who had the relations with Benosa Adam and gave birth to the Nephilim. And the Zohar speaks a great deal about Azah and Azoel, who they were and what they did wrong. But the primary thing that it seems underlies everything which Azah and Azoel did is that at the beginning, when man was created, so then the HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, Nasa Adam, and he convened the Malachim. And all the Malachim came and he said, okay, let's make man. And Azah and Azoel said, why would you make man? He's just going to sin. By the way, it's important to understand this. Everybody knew that Adam was going to sin with Chava. In other words, that they're going to eat from the Eitzadas. In Shamayim, they all knew this. Not because that had to happen. Otherwise, we wouldn't have Klal Yisrael. We wouldn't have history. Or if history happened, there had to be the Chet of Adam Rishon. It was as we call it in English, it was a frame-up. But so the Azah and Azoel were saying, listen, you're going to give him this Nisoyam, and he's going to mess up. So therefore, why should you make man? There's no purpose. You have the malachim. You don't need human beings. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu said to him, I'll show you. I'll send you down to the world, and you're going to sin more than they do. And Azan and Zoh were sent down with the capacity, obviously, to act as human beings, and they ran rampant and led eventually to the Dor HaMabul. It's interesting, just kind of on our side, there's a big machlekes between the Baalei Machshava as to whether Malachim have Bechira when they come down to this world. And the consent, the Or Sameach says they do, and the Michtem Elio says they don't. So the Michtem Elio says all the things we see Malachim punished for is not because they actually had free will, but they were pre-programmed to commit this sin, like when the Malachim said he knew Mashchisim Maser, we're going to destroy the city, and they were punished for being Balei Gaiva. According to Rav Dessler, it was their pre-programmed. They don't have their own Yitzhar. According to the Or Sameach, no, when Malachim come down to this world, and they do have a Yitzhar. The only reason they don't have a Yitzhar in Shamayim is because when you're confronted with truth in its the full-blown version, so you can't sin because you see emes in front of you. And if you see emes in front of you, therefore you're going to toe the line. But if you take away, you give even a malach a concealment, as they're upon him, so then he has the same Yitzhar as a human being. I don't say, but he has the Yitzhar just like a human being has. And so therefore, when a malach comes down to this world, he has the capacity to be chayte, just like a human being has the capacity because of the concealment in which he finds himself. And again, from Azan Azot, it seems that they were actually, the Chazal say that their Yetzer Hara, which they had when they came down below, caused them to sin with the Benos Adam. So they both sinned, Adam and the Azan Azot, with the sins of Taiva, manifest in different ways. Taiva for the fruits in the case of Adam, and Taiva for the women in the case of Azan Azot. But we're not here to be mechaper and the chet of Azan Azol in order to bring them back to do tshuva. We don't know where they are. We don't know if they still exist. But we have this notion also, and the Zohar actually makes the connection between the Soyer La'azazel and the Soyer Rosh Chodesh. The Soyer Rosh Chodesh, Chazal say that you bring a Soyer Chatas and Rosh Chodesh because the language of the Gemara is, I think it's in Chulin, Haviolai Kapara Shemiatati Esayarech. Bring for me an atonement because I diminished the moon. And what does it mean, atonement for HaKadosh Baruch Hu? So obviously it's not good. We don't need atonement for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hashem doesn't need our atonement. But what it means is that we're supposed to learn a lesson. And it's fascinating that the Zohar says that the Satan on Rosh Hashanah is confused. And we say that the shofar is to blow we blow the shofar to confuse the Satan. And he gets even more confused when the moon starts rising and growing between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And obviously the idea of the moon represents Am Yisrael because it waxes and wanes, and represents the human condition in this world, which constantly waxes and wanes, goes up and down all the time. And then comes Yom Kippur. And then Yom Kippur, we send the Soyer Azazel, and the Soyer Azazel makes the Satan very impressed. He's very happy with that, and he stops prosecuting and becomes a defense attorney. He returns from being a kategor to being a sanegor. And that's the purpose of the Soyer Azazel. So we have to understand, to the best of our capacity, how does this work? The Soyer Azazel is this kind of, like Ramban calls it, like a shochat, a bride to the Yitzhar. How's it working that this actually fixes the Satan and makes him happy and makes him go on our side? So first we have the distinction Azan Azal and the Satan. Azan Azal ran a counter purposes to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They argue on HaKadosh Baruch Hu. By the way, Malachim are allowed to argue on HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We find that all the time. There's a based in Shamala, right? Discussion goes on. But evidently Azan Azal's argument was not done, so to speak, L'Shem Shemaim, is done out of some sort of arrogance, and therefore it was not appropriate. So they come and they say man is not worth creating, and they're punished and they're sent down to show that they're going to be even worse. But the Satan, Gemara says, the famous Gemara at the end of first paragraph, Basra says, Satan P'tino L'Shem Shemaim Niskapu. both the Satan and what he did, and Penina, when she did what she did, they did the same Shemai. So Penina, we know she annoyed Chana in the last week's Rosh Hashanah's Haftorah, to get her to dive into a Kodesh Baruch Hu to have kids. That was her L'Shem Shemai. So the Gemara there says that when Eov was such a tzaddik, so then there was a problem, there was a suspicion that Kodesh Baruch Hu would find Eov, Satan had a suspicion that Kodesh Baruch Hu would find Eov more of a tzaddik than Avraham Avinu, and therefore he wanted to prove to Kodesh Baruch Hu, though there is no tzaddik like Avraham Avinu. Okay, whether we know that's not necessarily true that Eov even existed, so obviously the Gemara can be taken as a metaphor. But the point is that the Satan is the Sheish Shemaim, and it says there, I think it's Rabbi Abba who darshaned this, and the Satan came and kissed him on his legs after he darshaned this in public. And we know, of course, that the Satan also gave Moshe Rabbeinu a gift when Moshe Rabbeinu came to Shemayim, right? The Malachim, again, disagreeing with the Kodesh Baruch Hu, they said, Mali Lurisha Beinenu, right? And then, why do we need to, why is this person up with us? And Kodesh Baruch Hu said to Moshe, give them an answer, and Moshe gave an answer, and then they all gave him gifts. And the Chazal say that the gift that the Malach HaMavis, who is the Satan, gave to Moshe Rabbeinu was the gift of the Ktores, the knowledge that the Ktores is able to stop and arrest the Magefa, the plague which HaKadosh Baruch Hu brought on the Jews after Chet Edom. By Pinchas, after the Chet of Kozbi Basur. So on our perspective, the Satan is a good guy. He just does his job. He has a job to do, and he has to do it, and he does it well. And but he really is doing it in order that we should work in this world and earn our reward in the world to come, and be challenged and become much greater people. So there are two things one could do on Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is called Yom Kippurim. There's kapara and there's tara. What's the difference between kapara and tara? Kapara means that I'm in danger of getting this big punishment. So I want something to be mechaper, to atone for me that I won't get the punishment. That is the idea of a kapara. Tara is something else. Tara is to cleanse myself of sin. Not just to avoid punishment, but to cleanse myself of the sin. And that's what Kohen Gadol would say, Lifnei Hashem titoru. Not just that you should have a kapara, but that, of course, it said, on Hashem, kapar l'amcha Yisrael, but the end he said, Lifnei Hashem titoru. After kapara, the main thing we want is not just kapara, which would just stop our punishment, but also, and especially tara. So at the end of Yuma, we have the famous statement of Rabbi Kiva, Ashreichem Yisrael, Lifnei mi metar, atem metarim, mi metar eschem avichem shema shamayim. We get the Tara, which is from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that's really Mikveh Yisrael Hashem. That's the idea of Yom Kippur leading to that point. And the idea of Tara is represented by the Sor Lazazo. In other words, it's not just enough for us to bring a korban to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and ask for kapara, which is what the korbanos do, but we want to show that we are trying to get rid of the sin. And we send the sin back to the entity who gave it to us, so to speak, the Satan. And we want to cleanse ourselves, not just achieve atonement, but cleanse ourselves of the Averos. And that is the gift which we give, so to speak, to the Satan, to tell him, you know what, you did your job very well, but this is Yom Kippur. This is not who we want to be. And this works very well with the Rambam. The Rambam says that a person what is the Teshuvah Gemura, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu can testify about a person that he's not going to go back to this Aveira again. So the obvious question is, all of us know that most Aveiras which we did this week, we're going to do next week. Most Aveiras which we did this year, unfortunately, we're probably going to do next year as well. So how do we come before HaKadosh Baruch Hu on Yom Kippur and say, no, I'm not going to sin anymore. I'm at the level you could testify about me that I'm actually going to transcend this sin and be retire myself from the sin. So that, because obviously you're not going to do it again, it's a tara. So it's interesting, I want to share with you, there's in the Siddur Otzar Tfilos, which I use every year on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, at the very end of the Shemona Esrei, after the Al Chetz, it says there's a paragraph. Okay, actually, Notzarti Eni Kadai. Before it's created, I was worthless. And now that I was created, it's as if I wasn't created. I'm dirt in my lifetime. Certainly when I die. I'm like a vessel full of embarrassment and degradation. And then we say, you got something else, may be God's will that I don't sin anymore. And erase what I did with Rachamim. So there seems to be something missing here. It's it's a very rocky passage from Kechlim Malei Busha Klima to the Hira Tzom Milpanecha. So the Anaf Yosef brings down from Sefer Chemdas Hayomim. I know that is. It says that the Chemdas Hayomim would put in this nusach before Yiratzah. It says, I should say I'm not going to do it again. Because that's what the Rambam says. But I'm afraid of the Yetzirah. Because he's a fire, and I'm a human being, and it won't be able to overcome it. So if I accept it by myself, I tell you I'm not going to do it again, and it's just worse, hypocritical, but then I go back and do it again. So therefore, but you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you can help me out. Please help me out that I won't go back to the sin. So that makes the traverses the gap. I say that, okay, etc. I know that it's very difficult for me to get to that madrega. Please, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, help me out. And that's the madrega which Ram says is Teshuvah more. And I think that most of us, most years, and I mean, I'm sort of feeling myself, not all of us and not all years, some years. On Yom Kippur, we can reach a madrega for a moment, even perhaps longer, but especially for a moment, that at that moment, were we to stay at that moment for the rest of the year, we would not sin again. And that is the moment which is the Nakuda of Teshuvah, which HaKadosh Baruch Hu asks from us. And everybody should have a moment on Yom Kippur when they are metayar themselves from the Averos, when the Averos went back to the Sultan, so to speak. And the issue of Azav Azov, why are you creating man, is answered. Because man is capable of trying to rise above himself. And as Chazal say, in Yeshaya, the Navi Yeshaya, Malachim are called Oimdim, they stand. Human beings are called Mahalchim, they're going, they're walking, right? So we know that the Holech Adam Lebeis Olamo, person is constantly going to the world that he is creating for himself. So that idea of Mahalchim, that we are trying to be better, is the idea which underlies the response to Azon Azol. And the Sultan is there to make sure we're challenged along the way. Like the Mukubalim say, that it's not when we get to our blood, it shouldn't be Nama the Kisufa. It shouldn't be something which we get out of without earning it, which is embarrassing. So therefore the Sultan was placed there from the beginning. Remember, again, it's a frame up. So the sin was part of the big plan from the beginning till the end. In fact, the Ishbitzer, Tzodik, and others say that the person's sins are predetermined as to what is best for him in order to then turn around and make the Zdonos into Shkogos or the Zdonos into Schlios. All those sins are part and parcel of the program for you. Whether you actually get to fix them is a separate thing, but they're all part of the tailor-made program in order to make you all you can be. So the Sultan himself is waiting to see if Am Yisrael understands that even though the whole year they've accumulated all these Averos, Yom Kippur comes along, and that day they want to achieve that Tara, and the Tara is that we don't, again, not like, let's say, the Havdil, a Christian who just wants to make sure that he doesn't get punished, and therefore he has to say a certain amount of prayers. Or for that matter, certain brands of Christianity just accept as the Savior. No, we have to work on ourselves, and we have to make sure that we change ourselves and are metayar ourselves, not just mechaper on ourselves. And how, obviously, as I mentioned, it's a problem for us because we are, go back. So, of course, that moment on Yom Kippur, I think, again, is the moment where the Torah is accomplished and the slate starts afresh, clean, out of the Torah. And we know the Chazal say the Cheshbon Averos doesn't start on Yom Kippur, doesn't start those sukkahs because Am Yisrael goes up to such a high madrega that there's no Averos during the next 5 days. But what do we do the rest of the year? So there's a fascinating Reb Tzaddik. There's a Gemara in Rosh Hashanah which says, how do we daven during the rest of the year on people who are sick? It was, if on Rosh Hashanah it was destined that they would be ill, that year. That's it. So how can we daven every day and try and make them better? So the Gemara says we daven like Rabbi Yossi, because Rabbi Yossi says Adam nidam b'chol yom, a person is judged every day, and he brings down a pasuk to prove that. So Reb Tzaddik says a fascinating thing. He says there. Says in Sikas Tzaddik, he says, this Maimar is Mamar Yiki'i, a statement which has a goal. It's supposed to, it's literally a toil, right? It has a specific goal. Chazal decided we're going to change the way the world works. We're going to paskin like Rabbi Yossi. Adam nidam b'chol yom. Person's judged every day. And that because they wanted that our kilos throughout the entire year should be meaningful. So Rosh Hashanah obviously is the Yom Kippur, are days in which one tries to set the tone for the entire year. But every day a person can open the gates and a person can actually become uplifted in not just during Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, but Chazal deliberately made it for us that we can do it every day as well, which is a fascinating and very important thing for us because we are. I speak for myself again, but I suspect other people as well. We are the ADD generation. In other words, even though when we were growing up, they didn't have the words yet, right? But we grew up with the televisions, first generation growing up with televisions and all sorts of other distractions. And our focus is very, very limited. Our powers of concentration are very limited. I had a Rebbe in camp many years ago, Bill David Shlita, he said that you don't know how many questions you could resolve if you were able to think on something with focus and concentration for 5 minutes straight. And of course, I think I can do maybe 45 seconds. And I wrote several svarim and went through Shas several times on 45 seconds. But that's basically the concentration level that I have. So this is the way our generation is constantly befuddled and muddled. So Rav Zevin says, that's a chisaron and a maila. He says, this generation is called Ikvas of the Mashiach. Ikvas of the Mashiach means the footfalls of Mashiach, but also means the heels. And he says, the first generation of Am Yisrael is called the Dordea, the generation of the intellect, the head. They were very, very high. Last generation is called Ikvas of Mashiach, the heel. Right? We go from the head to the heel. He says the head has a tremendous maila and a tremendous chisaron. The tremendous mile of the head is that a head has intellect, has knowledge, it has good reason. But a head is very susceptible to wounds. Head wounds are devastating, and the head cannot be so protected because obviously you need the senses to function or be able to function in the world. So therefore, the heads are not as so protected. So the Dordea, the earlier generations, they had great intellect, but a sin would send them off the path completely. Like they weren't able to recover because they were so sensitive. Our generation, we are thick, we are dull, we are stupid, just like the heel. But the heel provides a lot of protection. It's thick, and now it's providing a lot of protection, but it's protected by the shoe, which in itself thick. So it says what does that mean? It means the Averos don't have the same impact upon us that they had in previous generations. Avera, like certain Averos we do on a regular basis, and previous generations would have sent them either to insane asylum or to Avodah Zarah. But our generation, no, we can go from right from an Avera to daven Marav with great kavanah. Right? We have this ADD capacity to compartmentalize and be able to The Averos don't affect us as much, and the mitzvahs don't affect us as much. But that's the point. In other words, we have this capacity to be able to use that thickness which we have to our advantage. And this Reb Tzadok brings that very often, the quote from the Rebbe Rabbeinu Pashischa. And it's a very, very interesting quote, which you can interpret in many different ways. That's the Rebbe Rabbeinu Pashischa. If in the Dairos Rishonim, earlier generations, Mashiach didn't come, how can we possibly expect Mashiach to come today? They are much higher Madrega. And they were in Zochah to Mashiach. How can we be Zochah to Mashiach? So the Rebbe Rabbeinu said, it's true that the generations are getting lower and lower, but the Nekuda HaPnimis is getting higher and higher. The inner spark, the inner point is getting higher and higher. And the Rebbe Rabbeinu did not give shot in it. Reb Tzadok says some place quotes it without interpretation, other places gives a little bit of interpretation, but the Pashut interpretation which we can give it is that that Nekuda Pnimis with which we have has to be very strong, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to confront in any way, shape, or form the onslaught of things which attack us every day from every corner. And it's essential for us to have the Psak of Rabbi Yossi, Adam Nidam B'chol Yom, because of everything which happens at a dizzying pace, which previous generations had no clue ever they would face. That things should happen, boom, 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 constantly. And this is good for us in several ways. Among them, unfortunately, and I say this about myself again, not anybody else here, that we make Kabbalahs and Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, and we don't always keep them afterwards. Some of them we do, some of them we don't. And for a previous generation, that would be a very, very big kitrug, a very, very big prosecution. But our generation, we're different. Since we have this concept of Adam Nidam B'chol Yom to a great extent, and we have things which happen to us at a rapid rate, which previous generations didn't have. So things change very often in the middle of the year. They change every day. So therefore, a person has to be awake every single moment. What this moment can bring to me, how I can grow from this. I have two examples, one personal and one general. I'll start with the general one for this past year, is that none of us could have anticipated last Rosh Hashanah that the coronavirus would have come, and how the world would change utterly and completely around Purim time this past year. And obviously, HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't expect the last Rosh Hashanah we should have planned and made our Kabbalahs for coronavirus. What I think he can expect from us is that when these Nisyonis come to confront us, that we use them the right way. Adam Nidam B'chol Yom. When it comes in the middle of the year, you have to see it as a test and an opportunity. And that only happens if, like we say, B'chol Drochecha Da'ehu, in all your pathways you know them. But no HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you want to be aware of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you want to be aware that there's a Ratzon Hashem and an opportunity in anything which you come across any time during the year, not just on Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, you focus and you plan and you have in mind, this is how I should approach the year. And you should make a Kabbalah, whether you're going to keep it or not, and hopefully you'll keep it this year. But the idea is to focus, to see what's going on, what our priorities are, and how to face this coming year. The other example for me, just personally, was that one of my friends, Micha Berger, came up with this idea of Aruch HaShulchan Yomi. I have had no idea Rosh Hashanah that by the time this Rosh Hashanah came along, I would have recorded 100 shiurim on Aruch HaShulchan. No, haven't been running Aruch HaShulchan. And yet, the opportunity presented itself in the middle of the year for me to start this with this cycle, which we started on Shavuos, and continue from there. So as obviously the Latin phrase "carpe diem," seize the day, but it's not just the day, because every day you can set a pattern for eternity, not just on Rosh Hashanah, not just Yom Kippur. Again, if a person thinks that way from the beginning of the year, then he tries to rectify every single Aveira by trying to, that's not the way, let me put it this way, sorry. He tries to seize every mitzvah and try to uplift himself as much as possible come Yom Kippur. Then he can say to the Satan that I don't want these Aveiros. I know I've sinned. I know I stumbled. They're tremendously serious, but I'm giving them back to you. And the Satan says, Mikam Chol Yisrael, right? They really, as we say with Sonein Lasos Ritzoncha, we really want to do the Ratzon Hashem. And Yom Kippur is about saying to Kodesh Baruch Hu, we want to do your ratzon. We want to be mitayr ourselves, not just kapara, but tara for these sins. And the soil azazel represented taking those sins and giving them back, the return policy. And that again is what the purpose of being the idea of being mechaper for the chet of azar and azoil is this idea of making sure that we show ourselves, we show the world, we show HaKadosh Baruch Hu that we understand we have a purpose in life, and we're constantly aware of that purpose as individuals and as a nation, and that we're out to accomplish that purpose as much as we possibly can, and we'll seize any opportunity that we can in order to do that. I spoke before about a moment. Usually when, I always tell people, and many of you probably will have heard this from me, if and when you hear this year, that I am an emotional cripple because I'm half Yekka and half Litvak. And none of these species do not do well with emotion. But so I never cry during davening the entire year. And again, not every year, but some years, depending on where I daven in the situation, I managed to get a few tears across, but at the end of Ni'ilah, by the Shema and the Baruch Shem, Hashem Elokim, and by the Meni Shmirab and Zkiya Shoifer of the end of Yom Kippur, and all the entire Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, the Slichas, the Bellos, Teshuvah, the whole purpose is to get that moment. Avraham Eli Kaplan says, you don't realize the idea of a rega. A moment can be a life-changing event. He says that any person can change not just their life, but another person's life in a moment. Sometimes it happens. Shuas Hashem Karafayim. But even if we don't change our lives permanently, that's the moment we're trying to accomplish on Yom Kippur. The moment when we transcend ourselves, when we feel we really don't want to go back to Averos. We really want to devote ourselves completely to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We really want to be the type of people who HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to create in this world with that idea of the Tzelem Elokim, of the divine form which HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us. So I tried a little bit to explain the Soil Azazel, and I want to end with the Ramban again, which is the Ramban says, gives that mashal to the Seudah, which we make for the king, where we give a little, the king says, give a little piece to my Ebed. The son is HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Ebed. He's doing what HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells him to do, right? And of course, we don't give honor to Avadim. We give honor to the Melech. That's the way it works in any kingdom. The Ebed is an Ebed. But the HaKadosh Baruch Hu says he has a mission. He has a purpose. The mission and purpose he has is to make sure that you're constantly challenged and to make sure that you're constantly trying to do what you're supposed to do in order to do Teshuvah, in order to do Ma'asim Tovim. So therefore, recognize his role. If that's the case, you recognize his role, then on Yom Kippur, you give him back, you give him the soil azazel, which according to the Ramban is not so, again, it's a shochad, but it shows us something that Am Yisrael is trying really to do what they're supposed to do in this world, and then he becomes from a kategor to a sanegor. Somebody asked me what Rosh Hashanah would say, ain't kategor not a sanegor, right? You don't want to take a shofar, which is made from a cow's horn, and we don't on Yom Kippur, we don't want to go in to the Beis HaMikdash with a kashkashim with big days off because the egel is up. So what ain't kategor not a sanegor? Why do you want the Satan to defend us? So the answer is obvious. For we ourselves don't want to make our prosecutor into our defense attorney because it looks bad for us to do it to ourselves, and also it might be something which sets us back. But of course, we want the actual prosecutor to turn into our defense attorney. We want the Satan to be on our side and say, Am Yisrael is worthy of a year of bracha and a year of Yeshua. So we should all be zeicha this year, individually and collectively, to be mechaper and the chet of Uzan Azael, to find every day we can, anything we can in order to uplift ourselves, even if it's in the middle of the year, and even if we've messed up, and we should all be zeicha to have a special relationship with Kadosh Baruch Hu, one which brings about that Kedusha and Tara, and ultimately bring the world to its tikkun. V'bias Mashiach tzidkenu b'meher v'yameinu amen. And an easy and meaningful fast to everybody.
Thank you.
Marchatima Tova.
Marchatima Tova.
I just sent that
You said in chat. Yeah.
As the dissertation on fallen angels.
It's very nice. Okay. Shkoyach.
Right.
Okay, good night.
Tova and Kol Tuv.
Thanks very much.
I will post this here on the blog and Facebook and all the places I usually post. Take care.
Zima Tova.
Zima Tova.